Howard, Karen,
Sir. Oh,
Teresa.
okay, Karen.
Mike is on the line. He's ready to go.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Well, you got my message?
All right, we're going to resume the March 10th Plains Sustainability Commission meeting. Now is transportation. We'll have a update of the transportation. Yeah.
All right. Good afternoon.
There they are.
Here we are. We're back. And I was gone on vacation for a week, so I feel like I just saw you all.
So if you can reintroduce yourselves.
We will. So Art Pierce from the Bureau of Transportation, and
Peter Hurley from the Bureau of Transportation.
so we met with you a couple weeks ago and discussed the proposed projects and programs for the transportation system plan. And you had some additional questions, asked for some additional information. And so we have some sort of additional information to provide you and some actually coming in hard copy for you to peruse. And we're happy to essentially facilitate and answer questions about sort of your thinking from the session. So what we're planning to cover today, I'm going to talk just a little bit about a little bit of context we want to make sure we don't lose, but then really we're going to be going into a little bit more background on some of the citywide programs and major projects, a little bit more information on analysis that you asked for in terms of really demographic information and those things to better understand the taste of the soup, again, to use an analogy we've been maybe belaboring too much at this point. And then we do have some guests coming to talk about TriMet's service enhancement plans, as well as this notion of how do we provide high-quality transit to all of Portland over time. And then some additional conversation with BES, because that was another question that you asked of us. Getting a little bit of feedback, I think, but is that all right? We're turned way up. Okay. Yeah.
Make it closer.
Really? Is that better? Yeah? Okay. There we go. All right. So again, the one bit of context we wanted to make sure we reiterated. So this is a 20-year long-range plan, the transportation system plan, and it is based on a series of financial assumptions. One of them that is very important for us not to forget is this assumption around new revenue, right? So we're talking a lot about whether projects in the constrained or the unconstrained, or where do projects lie in this bigger context? Without new revenue, it's a very hard conversation to have, and with some new revenue, it's still not an easy conversation, but at least we have more options. And so we wanted to make sure that we're providing that context kind of at every step of the way, that it's not as though there's a bonanza of money coming and we have to decide where to put it. We need to both figure out how to smartly invest our funds and how to increase our revenue over time to really be demonstrating the products that our citizens demand and the outputs that you're defining through policy. So just want to make sure that we don't forget that every step of the way, that this is not something that will be easy or will happen automatically just based on passing the TSP. So I'm going to pass this on over to Peter. He's going to talk a little bit more about some of the program reference lists. You had a lot of questions about how those might function.
So over the last couple of weeks, we did some work both on the citywide program lists and on the major projects. I'll talk about the citywide programs first and then answer some of the questions that you had asked at the previous meeting on the major programs. So a number of people have asked about the smaller projects, the ones generally under $500,000 that we have proposed for citywide programs. And we proposed 9 citywide programs as a way to bundle those small projects and make them more competitive in the ability to fund those projects over time. And we put together a list of, it's about 100 pages now, of small projects that we've identified from the Bike Master Plan, the Pedestrian Master Plan, the various other plans that have been developed over time. The Safe Routes to Schools list is, I believe, 63 pages. It's very, very extensive list. So these are examples from 4 of those programs on what type of project might fit within or does fit within those citywide programs. They tend to be crossing improvements, for example, in several places. They're filling in gaps in the sidewalk network. They're filling in gaps in the freight network. There's a freight priority program, for example, as well as significant improvements for safety in the high crash corridor and the Safe Routes to School program. So what we will be doing is posting that list. We're cleaning up the formatting, and we'll be posting the full list of all of those small projects by program on the web in the next couple of days.
One important note there is that these are examples necessarily. They're not necessarily every project that might be included in those activities.
Yes, and one of the other important things to recall is that these are not part of the land use decision that you'll be making. Unlike the major projects, we are required as part of state law to have a list of major projects. These are more, they're the small projects that are identified as part of the individual programs. They'll be updated on a more regular basis. We don't go into the same level of design at the project description component as we do at the time we're ready to actually go out in the field and build them. But we are going to put together a process so that people understand how the small projects are chosen.
Seeing some furrowed eyebrows, so let's stop there.
Peter, are these design budgets or construction budgets? I'll ask you that basic question.
These are, in some cases they're concept level
kind
as
of
well.
mixed
There,
list.
there might be several $7,000 components of the bike network completion. So in some cases they're more specific, and in other cases they're more general.
Thanks.
While we're still talking about programs, do programs make sense to you at this point, or should we help discuss those a little bit more?
Let's get through a couple of questions and we'll maybe answer that. Catherine, Gary, Chris. Catherine, did you want to?
Yeah, now I got all thrown up by Art's question because I'm not. But I'll get back to that. Just quickly, would the green loop that's being proposed in the West Quadrant plan be a small project or a major project? And does it show up on any of your lists? And if not, how do we make sure it does?
Almost undoubtedly, it would end up being a major project. I would love to be able to say that it would cost under $500,000, but I suspect that I would be wrong if I said that.
Actually, this is a good, reasonable segue to the next slide. This is talking about how do projects become a project, right? And so we have
That was
happen-
where my furrowed brow
Right,
went.
exactly. How do we make this into a project? So the current projects that are in the TSP, and we talked a little about this a little bit in the last briefing, was majority of them are from the 2007 TSP, so they already were in the last TSP, or they're part of an adopted plan that went through this body and city council in the time between 2007 and now. And so projects, do you remember me in a former hat, the North Macadam Transportation Strategy? I brought a whole list of projects to support the North Macadam URA. Many of those are now in the TSP, are now highlighted within the TSP small project investments because they had gone through a proceeding process like that. So the Central City Plan process, which will be coming out of the quadrant plans, is a place where the Green Loop could be formalized as a project recommendation, would be my suggestion. So it's not something that's in the TSP now. It is something that could come from a robust conversation such as the Central City Plan and be added into the TSP.
So is there a budget bucket for things that are going to be evolving in the future that get kind of allotted for or planned for?
Not really, no. There is some gap currently within the current financial plan, but not much. And so one of the things that we will probably have to do as more projects come in is modify the financial plan, right? The main moment when we go through and need the financial plan to match all the projects is during periodic review, so during this process, where as we're moving sort of farther through after that moment, you don't need to have the constant alignment of the financial plan and the project plan. But so the short answer is the Central City Plan is the place to, my recommendation for something like the Green Loop, to bring that forward and have that recommended as an addition to the TSP. There are elements of it that already exist. So for instance, the Clinton to the River Trail, which is highlighted on the Green Loop, is a project that we added to the TSP previously and have already built. So there's pieces of the potential Green Loop that are already in the system. Formalizing it as a whole Green Loop, we haven't yet done that.
Gary?
Good question.
Chris?
So let me tick these off in order. So I support the concept of programs.
I'll point out that in the transportation expert group process, there was some desire from people on the committee to have a way to bring in new projects into this cycle of the plan. I don't think we've really effectuated that. I was concerned that I had, and I think others had, is that conditions have changed, our policies have changed. We weren't sure that the old project lists were good fodder to produce a new project list. I have to say that having seen what came through the evaluation and prioritization process, I'm less concerned about that than I was at that time. But it's still a little bit of a concern that we don't have a way to get new ideas.
Particularly for the small projects, and this is actually what this slide is intended to queue up, is for the smaller investments, and we're still working on exactly how we'll manage the programs. The primary place we're hoping that these small investments will come from are from a broader modal plan. So freight, ped, bike, modal plans. An area plan where we've taken, so East Portland in Motion is a great example of an area plan where we took a closer look at an area and highlighted a bunch of small investments under a broader banner. And then also that we're assigning a program manager for each of those programs where they have some discretion to look at near-term small investments that resolve an immediate need. How those get mixed together into how that program gets funded and worked on is still something that we're working through with staff.
Okay, well, that segues nicely to my next question, which is, in the testimony we received, there have been a number of people who essentially said, include 100% of the bicycle master plan. So my question is, between the major projects and the programs, how close are we to including all of the bicycle master plan projects?
So all of the 80% list in the bicycle master plan is on the reference list for the either the neighborhood greenways or the bicycle completion component. So we've basically taken the list. We're in the process now of going through and removing the projects that have already been completed, making some fine-tuning changes for those that have evolved to the point that they're better described. But all of the projects that haven't been completed or haven't been funded are going to be on the reference list from that plan. Now, that doesn't mean that they are going to be built in the next 20 years.
List, right.
When you add up the cost, just for example, the pedestrian master plan, actually the pedestrian list, the reference list, which is partially from the master plan, but partially from other studies that have been done because the master plan is so old, there's about $1.3 billion worth of improvements in there, which is, from the previous slide that Art had up, that would be the entire 20-year reasonably aggressive revenue forecast. So we don't want to give the impression that all those projects are going to get built, but they are going to be on the list. If they've been in a plan, they will be on the list.
Okay, so then within the bicycle master plan, there are, well, I probably won't get this right. There are two significant off-street facilities identified, the North Portland Greenway and the I-84 trail. Sullivan's Gulch, thank you. That's what I was looking for. And there's also constituency around the Red Electric, although I'm not sure that was in the bicycle master plan. What portion of those actually get advanced on the constrained list?
So I think that would probably be a good one for us to come back and give you the specific information rather than the do partially off the top of my head. But there are several significant components of each that are on the constrained list.
Those are projects that have been broken into phases.
Right.
And so my recollection is some of the phases are included on the constraint and some of those phases are included on the unconstrained.
Thank you.
Correct.
Other questions? A question that we discussed in a previous discussion about housing and about zoning is that as we downzone some areas, especially in East Portland, we wanted to make sure that we didn't affect the transportation elements in those areas, that they didn't lose their priority, I guess, to get built because of your ranking. And remembering not so much the ranking, but the categories, the less dense areas seem to not be as high as the higher dense. And so we're doing some of that, but they're in East Portland. We want to capture that. And I think talking with Deborah, hopefully we can figure that out.
My understanding is the way that we scored the projects is including what you were projecting for the comp plan.
Oh, okay.
So we are already including not what's there today or under the previous comp plan, but what's proposed under this.
So the
current.
downzone's already included.
I believe so. Yeah, I'm getting heads nodding behind me. Yeah, okay, good.
Okay.
Well, yeah, we use the 2035 both job and housing projections
Okay.
to do the scoring. Okay, if you would move on to the next slide. So this is a slide that shows the constrained, unconstrained, and funded projects. The constrained ones are in green. These are the major projects, by the way. I'm shifting from talking about citywide programs. From citywide programs to the major projects piece, and this is a map of the major projects. The green are the constrained projects, the orange is unconstrained, and the blue are the projects that are funded and are moving forward. In the background, you'll see the 5 different pattern areas. So for example, the light green for the northern pattern area, the light blue for the western pattern area. One of the things that stood out to us is there are for example, in the western pattern area, there are both quite a few projects on the constrained list, but also quite a few on the unconstrained list. And there are some good reasons for that, one of which is, as Chair Baugh just mentioned, one of the criterion is the degree of, or the 2035 household projections. Another is the 2035 job projections. Those are generally lower in that area. But one of the other reasons that we identified for...
Can you say that again?
Sure. So the criterion that we used for evaluating projects included what are the projections for 2035 households and 2035 jobs. So places like centers and corridors that are projected to have a significantly higher job and household population tended to score better because they're going to be serving more people. So
what's significant?
So the reason that is significant here is that in the western pattern area, there were fewer centers and much, much less forecast job growth and much less forecast household growth. Dramatic differences between that and, say, East Portland or some of the corridors in Northeast and Southeast. So we took a look, we looked at this map, we said, this is interesting. There are a lot of, in East Portland, almost all of the projects are on the constrained list. In the western pattern area, there are a number of projects that aren't. Why is that? So we dug into what are some of the reasons, one of which has to do with centers and corridors and job and housing growth. One of the other reasons, though, is that there are a number of very expensive large projects. And so some of the comments that we've gotten from people in Southwest and other parts of the city suggested that we take a look at the phasing of projects, the segmenting of projects, or the rescoping of projects. And an example of that is Beaverton Hillsdale Highway, $3.5 million project. When we looked more closely, we identified there are 6 intersection improvements that collectively cost about $550,000 that would make major improvements for safety in that corridor at 1/7 the cost of the overall project. Now, our intent over the next month prior to sending you our revised recommendations for your vote in May is to take a look at the projects that have been identified by the community. You remember a number of people talked about Hamilton and Shattuck at the last, at your hearing. So we're going to take a look at projects like that and say, which ones of these might we be able to phase? We might be able to take the intersection improvements, for example, from Beaverton Hillsdale Highway and advance those earlier and perhaps turn some of those unconstrained projects into constrained projects. So part of what we're doing to respond to the community feedback that we received over the last several months is to look at, are there ways of taking these very expensive, very large projects and breaking them into phases or segments, or maybe even rescoping them so that rather than a full sidewalk, a 10-foot sidewalk on both sides of the street, maybe there's a sidewalk and a bike lane in the first phase of a project.
Howard, you had a question?
I'm a little confused, so it's more of a confusion. I hear the word intention, and I hear the word money, but I don't really hear the word priority. And I'm trying to figure out where priority fits all this. Because, yeah, the Western projects and the Eastern projects could be synthesized a lot of different ways. But in community need and in the interest of the better community, priorities really need to be set. And I don't hear that necessarily being discussed.
Coming up soon. I think we're almost through this piece, and there's a lot of discussion of priority in my section. So I think maybe let's hold that and for 10 minutes, and if I haven't gotten you there, you can bring me back to it. You want to talk quickly about
Sure.
East? Yeah.
So one of the questions that came up was how much are we investing in the high growth, high needs centers in East Portland? We took a look at the projects here. There's $218 million worth of projects, which is 17% of the total in the constrained list, and about a quarter of the major projects in there. The $218 million does not include the citywide programs. That's just the major projects in there. So we can give you a list of those.
And that's combined.
Correct, in the 5 centers. It varies from, I think in the low end, 15 million to 94 million on the high end in the 5 centers. And then one of the other questions on the next slide is a question about the Albina Community Plan and what type of investments have we made and are we planning to make in that area. The plan itself does not include a list of projects. It was back in the era where we identified needs. The projects that have been completed in that area, this is just a short list. We have a much longer list that we're happy to share with you, but there are 4 there that have been completed, 3 others that have been funded and that will be completed in the next several years. They're in our capital improvement plan, and then 3 examples of projects that are on the constrained list that we're recommending, the draft constrained list. And go ahead. This is where we will shift from a conversation about the citywide programs and responses to specific questions to more of the prioritization that Howard was referring to.
All right. So we've got coming up is we showed you a couple maps last time, but there's a lot of questions around, how does what we're proposing for funded projects, but mostly constrained and unconstrained projects relate to a variety of demographics? How do we know if we're getting the mix right relative to things you might care about? So we have a number of maps to try to help sort of illuminate that for you a bit here. The one map that we did show last time that is sort of context before we kind of flash through some of the others is talking about on the left here is the share of constrained spending, so the projected spending within the constrained list of the TSP by geography, and then the share of projected 2035 households and jobs based on that same geography. So you can kind of see, based on this sort of relative shape of the pie charts, how we're doing relative to the number of people in those areas, the projected amount of spending. The next slide that we also shared last time was when you combine those two together, you'll see the essentially share per user of projected spending within the TSP by those geographies. So some, you can see the average is about $1,100 per person in 2035. And then by the individual geographies, you can see the relative allocation of funding per person within those areas as well. Taking it to a new level, what we're now going to be showing you is a little bit about how the scoring worked and how these different influences influence projects. So this first map here is showing you the projects that essentially scored really well are in red relative to equity. So this is an equity score sheet essentially for the TSP projects. And so you'll see that the ones that scored the best for equity are East Portland projects primarily, and those are the ones in red and in yellow.
That scored
the best, yes. For health, really a mixture, but a lot of the projects are are the ones that are in East Portland and Southwest. If you can see, just quickly scanning, are the ones that scored well on health. Some within the industry pattern area as well.
So how did you determine health?
So health was based on the likelihood of people being able to increase physical activity, walking and bicycling. So what we looked at is where there are deficiencies in the gaps and deficiencies in the network. Presumably, the idea is that if you improve, if you reduce gaps and deficiencies, it increases the likelihood that people who currently are not walking or bicycling are more likely to do so, particularly in relation to destinations.
Yeah.
Are the ones in Southwest, are there a lot of trail improvements in those groups?
A mixture, really.
Really, it is a
Yep.
mixture?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, the equity index, again,
Yep. Yep.
a lot of these, it looks like a lot of these roads are on the constrained list. Is that again because they were so expensive that you took?
Ooh, let me, sorry, before we get to the constraint unconstrained, let me switch it to a couple more slides. So this is showing you a little bit about how individual projects responded to criteria. So if we, and let me just try to go quickly through those. So there's safety. You see how certain projects scored well on safety. Here are projects that scored well on freight mobility. Here are projects that scored well relative to their cost effectiveness. If you go next, now we're talking about whether a project is on the constrained or unconstrained list relative to equity. So now you can
So
see that
can
the
you
projects.
back up just a
I
second?
will. Okay. So yeah, I will. I can go back up. So this is now the constrained, unconstrained, and funded based on different type of characteristics. The previous slides are how well something did based on the project did. So this is a project scoring, not whether it's on the constrained or unconstrained.
And again, how well they did means,
Red
so,
3 is better, right?
so the black 4 means
The-
it's
so-
not, you
no.
need more policies that encourage equity.
So the black 4 is areas that have a equity concern, have an equity need based on the characteristics of that area. And this is actually, I think this is using BPS's sort of multiple characteristics. So it's seniors, youth, and
Low income and
Low income.
people of color. So 4, for example, on this chart would indicate that all 4 populations are higher than the city average. And projects that show up in red there are projects which scored the highest, which is a 3. And there's should be, and there is, a very strong correlation between populations underserved populations and how a project scored.
Howard, we lost you. Okay.
I'm down to chapter 2 here.
Yeah.
It looks like the east side's taking it in nose here. Constrained but necessary. Is that accurate reading?
I don't think so. So if you're looking at the map that matches what's on the screen here. Yep. You got it? Okay. For this, if you're looking at how something's scored, I apologize, we have 2 different sets of conversation. The first one is, how was a project influenced by characteristics? So this is showing you that something in red here scored well, right? If we're going, the other one that's focused on equity is now showing you projects that are in blue are funded, projects in green are constrained, and the projects in orange are in the unconstrained. So that's showing, for this one, it's showing you that the constrained projects and the funded projects, that the vast majority of those projects in East Portland are on the constrained list, meaning that they are winners in this conversation. Constrained is within the funding plan for the 20 years.
Financial constraint.
Okay, so that's why, no. So the constrained list is, constrained means good. So sorry, we went through a lot of labor with this, Howard, at the last meeting, and we thought we had built a foundation which we had not built, so I apologize. So we had Mark go through slide after slide describing what these meant. So the constrained project list means that fits within what we think we will have the resources to spend on. The unconstrained means it's outside of what we can expect to have resources on.
And the funded ones are actually in our capital improvement program. So we have the funds for those, and those will be constructed. So the ones that are in blue up here.
So
I'm glad we clarified this. Yeah, right. So no, so quite the contrary to your statement, the projects in East Portland did very, very well on a number of criteria. So the criteria-based maps all show how East Portland scored well on a lot of these different criteria, as well as on the output, which is here now in constrained, unconstrained, is showing you that within the areas of high equity concern, we are choosing those projects to be primarily ones that are on the funded list or the constrained list.
So, Chris?
Yeah, a question of how we could put our thumb on the scale. So in the TEG process, we talked about whether the factors should be weighted differently.
Sure.
And the decision there was to keep everything weighted equally, and I think it came up was mentioned in the discussion last time you were here. So if we were to say, we'd like you to go back and recalculate, giving double priority to equity. Would you have the ability to do that? Would you have the ability to then evaluate how that list performs against our objectives? And would you recommend it as a useful exercise?
We do have the ability to do it. I'm not sure, given that so the focus of this was not just on how we score on one criteria, but it's how we score on multiple criteria. Right. So we could certainly add extra influence of certain criteria, and when we were working on building the methodology, we heard from you and from community groups about we didn't have enough economic influence, and so we added a couple freight scores directly into it. So certainly have the ability. At this point, it would be probably more productive to focus on specific projects that we are not adequately addressing. But we could go back and change the emphasis based on one particular criteria, and adding emphasis on the criteria. I'm not sure how much it would end up changing the product. Yeah.
In part because we've sliced and diced these several different ways, and we've looked at the constrained and the unconstrained list. It would not substantially change the list because the projects that scored the highest on equity, that received a score of 3 or 2, over 90% of them are on the constrained list.
Okay, thank you.
So a question, it's great to see East County getting a high score, but relative to spending in years, so looking at whether they're prioritized in the first 5, the next 5, kind of out through there.
So we at this point the list is as that you've been sent has a 1 through 10
Yes.
and an 11 through 20. We don't yet have the next round, and we're not sure that we actually will be able to do that based on the timeline that we have now. Right?
So, but the East County projects are majority in
the constrained, I don't have
20 or in the constrained.
They're in the constrained,
Yes.
right? The in terms of whether or not they're in the 1 through 10 or 11 through 20, we don't have a map that can produce that, but we can produce that for you if you'd like that.
That would be helpful.
Sure. Okay. Yep. Okay.
Catherine?
Hopefully a quick answer, but I'm sure somewhat different for different situations. Is there sometimes you're seeing a constrained project line, a green line, turn into an orange line, turn back into a green line? Does that mean that the orange is already in such a situation that, how did that happen, or explain that anomaly?
Some of it will depend on a phasing of a project. So the Sullivan's Gulch question, I think, that was asked earlier is a good example where the near-in section of the Sullivan's Gulch is on the constrained, and I believe that the outer sections of the Sullivan's Gulch are on the unconstrained, meaning that we expect to be able to get to the near term, but we don't expect to be able to get to the longer extent of it within the funding that we are anticipating.
So if you're seeing a gap in a line, is maybe some of the reason it's constrained or unconstrained because it doesn't need as much improvement? I guess, so in particular, I guess I happen to know this road, so I'll just pick it out. You've got, it looks like Macadam that goes green to the south, orange in the middle, and green on the north. So what's going on in John's Landing that makes it unconstrained? Now, granted, maybe it's just already improved that you're not worried about it, and that's why it's less important. I guess
That one we have to get back to. I actually don't know the details of that one. But one of the examples that I think we've had a lot of conversation again in Southwest on is, are there certain segments, for instance, where there's a high Somali community that are walking along the edges of an unpaved, unimproved sidewalk area that we should prioritize first and do that segment first and break it apart and not do the whole project at once because it's too big to bite off. So there may be examples where we
Kinda like
already have that, or where we should choose to do that to make what we can get working through the pipeline more manageable.
Well, and I guess I don't need an answer to like that specific question as much as just, and at some, making sure that at some point someone's looking at, that doesn't make sense, or it does make sense for a good reason on phasing. That's-
One other reason that that might occur is that because we're attempting to build projects earlier in places with higher job growth and population growth to be consistent with the comprehensive plan and to serve more people, there may be some segments that are within centers that we're saying put those on the constrained list. But generally, what you wouldn't see is the same project with a constrained portion and an unconstrained portion. What you would see is different projects that might be meeting different needs. So in a center, for example, you might have a project that, because there have been crashes in that area, meet both the need to serve more people, more households, and address a safety concern. So that's why, an example of why you might see a constrained project adjacent to an unconstrained one, because the constrained one is addressing a safety concern and jobs and housing.
Totally makes sense. Now I'm going to make you go back to McJohn's Landing at some point and look it up, because there is a center, I think, and and it's unconstrained, and yet it's got edges of it that are
Right.
constrained. So that just seems odd.
And I'm actually, based on the map, I'm not sure whether this is a trail or actually on Macadam Boulevard itself.
Might be.
Or, so we'll just have to look back at what it is that line represents.
Got
Yeah,
it.
yeah. So, Michelle. Yeah.
Michelle?
When you do the mapping of East Portland in terms of years 1 through 10 and 11 through 12, if you can do the freight corridors.
Yes, okay.
Cool maps.
Yeah.
Lots of it. So this is not intended to be the end of the conversation, but we wanted to present this and have you have these maps as reference. So as you're thinking about, again, the taste of the soup, have we gotten this right? You have these as reference to flip back and forth and be able to reference that.
Yeah, the maps are really great. On the safety one, there's a lot of little bubbles all over. Is that, give me a reading, is that expected? Are we horribly unsafe and killing people all the time on our streets? Or do we need some sort of perspective on that?
So I'm not actually, deeply integrated in the safety team, but so this is areas where there are either serious or injuries. So if you look at the bubbles there, these are the fatal or serious injuries in the last 10 years, essentially, right? So there are a number of places in which there are incidents that are related to traffic fatalities or incidents, yes.
One of the other things to point out is that, yes, we do have a significant safety issue. The director spoke about Vision Zero at the February 24th hearing. We have identified as part of 2 citywide programs, the High Crash Corridors program and the Safe Routes to School, very extensive list of safety improvements that don't show up here because they're very small dots, essentially, on the map. These are the major projects that are attempting to address safety. There are also some pretty extensive programs as part of the street fund, for example, that we could make significant progress if we had funding to do so on those programs.
Okay. Chris, quick, and then we need.
Yeah, I actually have an agenda question for you, Mr. Chair. I know we're revisiting this again at our next meeting, and I know we agreed that the streetcar conversation would happen then. I don't remember relative to the CRC and West Hayden Island projects, if we were going to try and tackle that today, or if that's also for the next meeting.
24th.
That is the 24th. Okay, then I'll shut up.
But also, actually, in the interest of time, maybe I'll show you the rest of these maps, and you can pick which ones you might want me to go back to talk a little bit more about, or if there's more information you want on these. We do have TriMet here for the sort of the next portion of our conversation, talking about enhanced transit service. So I don't want to spend too much time here if your review of the maps can produce questions that we can answer as we go through them.
One quick thing before you do it. Could you just explain, I think I get project point, project line, explain project area,
Sure.
what that,
Do you have a good example?
Sure. So the Gateway street improvements, for example, we identified as part of a plan, an area plan, that there are numerous small improvements that need to occur in that area. those were bundled together into a single project that shows up as a major project for numerous street improvements, both bike ped and general mobility.
I think another example is East Portland access to transit, which so a lot of the East Portland is
It's all the
hashed
funded
based on
money, yeah.
a whole bunch of small investments that are going to help people get to transit lines there. So the other maps that are in your packet, so there's one relative to safety, there's one relative to projected housing units. So you can think a little bit about that depending on where the housing communities will be developing. There's one relative to jobs. So you can think about where the investments are relative to projected number of jobs.
Is this current job density, Art? Or
This is 2035. All of these are 2035 based on the comp plan. So again, the premise we're building off of is the transportation system plan is the investment strategy to support the comprehensive plan's growth strategy, right? So we're trying to pair those two up, thinking about 2035 as the future year we're trying to meet. Here is a map showing highlights of investments within the centers. And again, because we're looking at a general controlled universe of the projects, we're really, what you look at it here is seeing whether or not there are projects that are in blue, green, or orange in different centers, and understanding whether we have the right mix for those centers just in terms of color balance. All right, and then the last one is looking at how does this relevant to urban renewal areas? That was another question that was brought up. And so this map shows the projected projects that are either currently funded within urban renewal areas or could be funded within urban renewal areas that are on the constrained or the unconstrained.
What's the Foster Boulevard one?
So that's the Foster Streetscape project.
Okay.
So that is funded. We have a federal grant together with some SDCs and PDC
That's
funds for
excellent.
that.
Good.
Yeah. So that's one that I think Mauricio was the project manager for, and I think he brought the Foster plan through this group in the last year and a half. Anyway,
It goes
yeah.
down to 50th, as I recall.
That's correct. Exactly. Yep. So that's all that we have for the deluge of maps and information. Really, for your reference, we're happy to, if you want to compile questions about them and you have more details you want, we can certainly produce the 1 through 10 and 11 through 20 for a couple of those answers for both East Portland and Freight. And then you can let us know if there's other sort of ways you want us to analyze the information to make sure that you're getting the right feel for it.
Looks like they're bringing back the Cooch couplet. Sneaking it back in.
I don't think it ever went away.
Yeah, it is there for your discussion.
Thank you.
leaving. I'm never.
Council adopted it. I remember that.
Hard.
Yeah, okay. So I think we're bringing up Alan Leto, and the next show will right on here.
The introduction.
Yeah. Okay.
Alan, you need to get us away
brought up-
from,
okay.
get us away from this Cooch discussion.
Right, exactly. Right.
Take us
So,
far away from that.
So for, come on, have a seat, and we'll, so for quick introduction, a reminder, one of the topics that was brought up really by Andre and by a couple others was how does transit service fit into this package, right? How did this conversation, where does transit fit into this? So we have asked TriMet to come, and I don't know if you are the present or if you have a team.
I'm going to bring a team.
You're going to bring it, so I'll get out of the way.
Okay.
But so Alan Leto is here from TriMet, and he has some of his team who are working on the service enhancement planning for various portions of City of Portland. And then after his team presents that, we will talk some about this notion of how do we assure transit services coming to certain areas, how do we collaborate between agencies to do that?
So thank you for having me. Again, Alan Leto, Director of Planning and Policy at TriMet. We're going to be doing a little bit of musical chairs here. I'm going to talk for a couple of minutes. I'm going to have my team come up and talk about each of the areas of the service enhancement plans, which I'll give an overview of in a moment. And then Art is going to come back up, and we're going to talk about the kind of partnership between the city and TriMet to move towards some of these goals and aspirations that we've been talking about.
Before you get
So-
started,
yeah,
do you
go
want
ahead.
us to ask questions during or just hold off to the
I'm
end?
fine with questions during. Yep.
Okay. In the interest of time, we'll make them short, and then we'll try to save them to the end, though, I
Great.
think. Okay?
So we'll try not to belabor this, but I did want to give you a brief overview here. good. Okay. First, I did not look at the last date I was here to talk to you. I did update you on the service enhancement plans and some of our thinking, but it had not been nearly as well developed. And I think we're in different financial situation than we were the last time I was in front of you. So I wanted to give you that update. We've been working diligently with our represented employees, and I'm happy to say that we reached a mediated agreement with them that gets us to something that is much more sustainable than what we were looking at, frankly, than we've been looking at for the past probably 20 years, where the picture was before we had made some progress on our long-term financial stability, but we're still struggling and looking for a way to work together to get to that kind of place where we're stable. We are now, with that agreement in place, at a stable position and able to seriously look at kind of future improvements, keep up with all of our current requirements, and get more behind our ability to increase over time. So I'm very happy to say that. Given that, again, this is the snapshot of what we're doing this year, and this caps off. I talked about restoration of frequent service that we've been doing over the past couple of years as the economy has turned back around and as we've started to get some of this good financial news back. And so we actually just about 10 days ago brought our frequent service network, so those buses, those bus lines, largely within the city of Portland, things like Division and Fessenden and MLK, up to frequent service, not only on weekdays, but also on Saturdays. So that's in place as of March 1st. We're looking at finishing out weekends, hopefully by the end of this coming fiscal year, and we'll have an announcement about our budget actually tomorrow in front of our board that hopefully will bring good news to folks. We're also looking at other improvements, including and not least the Orange Line opening, which includes both the improvement of the light rail project itself, the Tillicum Crossing, but as well as bus service connecting and serving neighborhoods throughout the corridor with some pretty substantial increases in service along those areas. So it's not just those folks at the station areas, but the neighborhoods throughout that are benefiting from the project and getting better connections. We also, I guess I should say, with that financial stability that I talked about, we're able to do what we should be doing every single year, which is make investments in capacity. So those trips that are consistently overloading, we put more service out to handle that. Those lines and trips that are consistently behind time because we're chasing after growing traffic congestion or other reasons need additional resources. It doesn't bring more service, but it makes the service far more reliable to be able to put more resources into rewriting those schedules and allowing more time. So we're doing that as well, and we've got that in the long-range plan to continue to do that every year from here on out. Looking farther forward, that's our service enhancement plan, what we've kind of dubbed the future of transit, talking with communities, neighborhoods, business associations, individuals, social service providers, pretty much anybody who's willing to put up with talking to us about what the future vision ought to look like in terms of service. And this is about the service network. This isn't focused on any particular projects. This is what the whole bus network, the entire transit network looks like. So every line is on the table. Service, reorientation of service, new connections, new coverage, more frequency, all of those are part of the language of what this looks like. Excuse me. So we've been working on those diligently over the past several years, actually, and I gave you a briefing on some of that the last time I was here, but this is an update.
The first one that we took on was the west side, partially because it had been kind of the longest to go that we had looked at the basic fundamental structure of it. And that has been completed, and we've started making incremental improvements to that following that SEP Future of Transit template. And now we are working on southwest, east side, southeast, and north central, staggered, you can see there. And these are the ones that touch on the city of Portland. I'm going to have my staff talk about each one of those as we get to it, but wanted to give you the overview of what this looks like and where we are in the process. And don't worry about the specific steps. The basic concept here is the green up top is gathering information, talking to people, looking at future visions that are developed by jurisdictions, neighborhoods, everybody else. So we've been spending a lot of time learning from BPS staff about what's in the future for the city of Portland, as well as other cities around and counties around the region. Collecting that kind of data, thinking about future growth and current needs, and then bringing and putting that together with understanding what the needs appear to be, putting together draft visions that people can start to respond to, gathering that feedback, and then putting together refined visions for a final look. And this graphic is a little off. The southwest, we are not finalized. We're actually, this is kind of, I think, our last check-in with you all about we have a draft vision that's out there for review and want to get any feedback from all of you. Certainly, city staff has taken a look at it.
Alan, the SAP is something enhancement plan?
It's service enhancement plan, yep.
So this matches the 2035 comp plan proposal that we have on the table today and the transportation systems plan investment strategy.
They are relatively well informed with each other, but we don't have a specific vision on the table for these areas in terms of what the route structure would actually look like and all of the frequency improvements. So they are consistent at the broad level, but the details are still being worked out, if that makes sense.
But at the end
I
of the
probably
day,
need to look at PBOT staff to understand.
Well, at the end of the day, PBOT just sat here and said they were going to make some bunch of improvements in East County. So theoretically, you're following with transit, but we're trying to figure out when that date is from PBOT. Is the transit, I guess, if it's 10 years out for the sidewalks and whatever, is the service enhancement that you're putting together for East County in line with what they're doing?
We think it's consistent. If you or staff see anything that isn't consistent, please let us know. What our intention is, we're creating a vision that is roughly a 20-year vision. We're not going to prioritize step by step by step by step because we have to respond to what the critical needs are each year as we're able to do those incremental improvements. So some of that decision making to support timeline has to happen as we go in and actually implement the SEP.
Keep going.
Part of what I think you're getting to, Andre, though, is actually we're going to probably better respond to in the second half of this presentation, where we actually talk about how we're tying ourselves together much more closely. And I'll talk about that after we give you the update on the SEP.
Keep going then.
Yeah, what I'm actually going to do now is we'd like to give you a little bit of a flavor of each of these service enhancement plan areas that are within the city of Portland. So I'm going to ask my team to come on up and give you an update on each of those. Maybe Matt, rather than me introducing you each, introduce yourself. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, thanks for having us today. My name is Vanessa Vassar, and I am working on the East Side Service Enhancement Plan area along with the Southeast Service Enhancement Plan area. I've been working closely with Steve Kautz, who's been leading the effort, and he's in the audience today. Did you want to introduce yourself? Go ahead. Okay.
Now hit the down button.
There we go.
Okay.
I have bad luck with PowerPoint today. I was wrestling with one earlier today, too.
So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the East Side Service Enhancement Plan process. So the East Side area covers East Portland, generally east of I-205, and it also includes areas of East Multnomah County, which includes Fairview, Troutdale, Wood Village, and Gresham. Currently, we are wrapping up the initial outreach phase of the process and drafting up a vision. The vision should be available for public review in April, and currently we're scheduling meetings with PBOT and BPS staff to have the initial review before we go out to the public. We've done extensive outreach to get to what we're displaying today of the basically what are the highlights we've learned so far. We've worked closely with the East Portland Action Plan and Laura Wintergreen and those committees. We've also been working with the East Portland Neighborhood Office, and I noticed that David Hampson's here today, and we've been working with him on that survey and learning from the results that he's collected. And we've also been working a lot with community organizations in schools and reaching out to limited English proficiency populations. We've done a couple events geared towards reaching more Latino families and have been able to gather some information through that. But just to give you an overview of what we've heard so far, we've heard a lot about providing more coverage, specifically north-south service along 148th and 162nd. We've also heard about the need for more east-west service, specifically on Gleason, where the line 25 is currently running, extending that out to 181st to 257th to better serve Reynolds High School. We've also heard about the need for providing more service earlier in the day, later in the day, and more often on 122nd Avenue where line 71 serves. And then also better serving some of the main east-west corridors, which are listed in the PowerPoint. We've also heard about connecting, providing better connections to job centers such as the Columbia Corridor and Airport Way, and providing more access to education and healthy food options, specifically in the Rockwood and the Rosewood area. And lastly, we've been coordinating closely with Metro staff and City of Portland and City of Gresham staff who are working on the Powell Division BRT project so that we are informing each other of what the community needs are, and so we're aligning our plans together. We've also just been partnering on outreach opportunities whenever there's a possibility. So I'm going to pass it over to Kate, who's going to talk about the North Central area.
Before you move to North Central, a couple items. Is the division, I'm a number 4 bus rider, is that going to become a BRT, the division route?
Just briefly,
towards that.
where the steering committee has brought us is a recommendation to pursue bus rapid transit on an alignment that covers the western portion of Powell and then the eastern portion of Division.
Oh, I get it.
And the crossover is not yet determined. There's definitely some leaning towards 82nd to make that connection. So the western portion of Division will continue to be frequent service and more. And the eastern portion of Outer Powell, which has not really been, sometimes it shows up on our map as frequent service, sometimes it doesn't, but with this restoration, we are making that frequent service. That will continue to be frequent service.
And then, Alan, the key link will be 82nd between those two routes.
That's, if I read the tea leaves, we might end up there. The steering committee has not given us direction on which crossover to use yet.
Now, a simple question. Is 122nd a loop route? I'm trying to remember.
No, it's more of a U, a horseshoe.
Oh, okay. As long as I know the shape. Down and back, essentially.
What happens is it goes on. It serves 122nd, basically from
Foster.
From Lentz on Foster,
Right.
up 122nd to Park Rose, and then serves 60th and 52nd on the other side, but ends up at Clackamas Town Center.
Yeah.
And so the 122nd side is the significantly higher demand. It's also the place with the population that is more of a community of concern.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about sort of frequent service on 122nd, we'd probably be looking at breaking those two and really put in the effort into the 122nd.
Okay, thank you. It's a 71 route, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Got to get home, huh?
Just missed the bus, Don.
I gotta go.
Got to go.
Hi, my name is Kate Lyman, and I am leading the North Central Service Enhancement Plan area. This area includes the majority of the city of Portland. We've got the area west of I-205 and north of Division, and then all the way out to the Multnomah County, Washington County border on the west side. We've been doing outreach in this area actively since the middle of last year. We held a survey in the fall, and we received responses from about 3,400 Portlanders in this area. We've also had conversations with all of the neighborhood coalitions in this area, as well as several individual neighborhood associations. We've talked with multiple business associations, all of the active transportation management associations, and multiple community-based organizations in this area, including Verde, the Urban League, and NEA, just to name a few. And finally, we held an open house last week in North Portland to provide another opportunity for folks to talk to us about their ideas for improved transit in this area. So what we have learned is that there are some job centers within the city of Portland that could use more transit service. Folks are interested in better connections to Rivergate, particularly from St. John's, other neighborhoods of North Portland, and from Northeast Portland. People are interested in better connections to the Columbia Corridor, particularly from Northeast and East Portland. There's interest in just more general east side to west side connections. And there's particular interest in better access to the Portland Airport and Cascade Station from those folks in Northeast and North Portland for whom it's not particularly convenient to take the red line to get there. There are also some neighborhoods within the city that, for which it is a little bit farther of a walk to their nearest bus stop than others. So that's what that means when I say more coverage is needed in certain neighborhoods. Those neighborhoods include Cully, East Columbia, Hayden Island, Northwest Heights, and then the River District north of Northrop in the Pearl District. There's also desires for increased service in the form of more frequency or extended span for some of the bus routes that currently serve job centers, and that's in particular Swan Island, which has a bus route, and Rivergate, which does have a bus route, but both of those people have talked to us about the need for improved frequency and span to serve the variety of jobs that are present in those areas. And finally, many Portlanders have talked to us about the need for faster travel times throughout the city. The number one reason we heard on our survey for why people don't currently ride the bus is that it takes too long. And so we've been hearing that particularly from riders on our frequent service lines, but also from people who live in St. John's. Okay.
Excuse me, what is the route from St. John's Town into central Portland?
There are multiple routes. We think the fastest route is line 16, which goes across the St. John's Bridge and in Highway 30.
Yeah. Thank you.
Are there really limited routes in Northwest Heights because of the steep road gradients? That's a tough place to run a bus.
It's fairly low density as well.
You gotta walk to the bottom of the hill and get on it pretty much, right?
That's been an on and off bus service as long as I've been here. That bus stops and starts, and then you bring it back, and then you take it away. Tough deal.
Yeah.
It's a local constituency that wants service.
Maggie?
Up in your end?
I don't know if I heard you say this, but actually east-west along the, oh, I guess that wouldn't be north. Never mind. Take Answer my own question.
Okay, we'll move on to the Southeast Service Enhancement Plan area, and this is in the initial outreach phase. We currently have a survey open and are gathering information to use for a draft vision. The survey is out in English, Spanish, Chinese, Vietnamese, and Russian. And just to, I guess, reiterate, the Southeast SEP area there's a portion of it within Southeast Portland, generally south of Division, and the rest is in Clackamas County. It should be noted that there's been a significant effort underway to identify and implement bus service improvements with the new Orange Line Max. And some of these improvements are falling within the Southeast SEP area. So there'll be additional bus service from the Selwood Moreland area to Tacoma, to the Tacoma station, and then to downtown Portland through via the Selwood Bridge. And there'll also be more weekend service on Line 19, serving inner Southeast neighborhoods such as Woodstock, Selwood, and Moreland. Some of the other things that we've learned throughout the Southeast SCP process is the need for better connections to job and education centers. So we've heard a lot about the need for more service earlier in the day, later in the evening, and more often to the Orange Line in downtown Portland, coming from the Selwood Moreland area, as well as Milwaukee, Oak Grove, and other areas of Clackamas County. And just to note with this as well, the Powell Division BRT project also falls within the Southeast SCP area, so we're also coordinating closely with Metro and city staff.
Thank you. My name is Tom Mills, and I'm the project lead for the Southwest Service Enhancement Plan, the last one you're going to hear about today. The Southwest Service Enhancement Plan area covers, well, the boundaries are 405, so the south part of downtown at 405, Highway 26 to Shoals Ferry Road, and then going all the way out to South Beaverton, and then on the east side, the Willamette River. So it really actually includes Multnomah County, Washington County, and parts of Clackamas County. We, like Vanessa and Kate, we did quite a bit of outreach to the communities within the boundaries on the Southwest Service Enhancement Plan. We held community meetings, we conducted surveys, we had focus groups and stakeholder meetings. But you know, you can have community meetings, but also know that there's some people just aren't going to come to those meetings. So we made special efforts to reach out to communities of limited English. So we did outreach to Spanish-speaking communities, Vietnamese-speaking communities, as well as we held a focus group with Somali women at the Capitol Hill Library that was really very successful. We also reached out, working with community partners for affordable housing, reached out to low-income communities, as well as working with Neighborhood House to talk to seniors at a senior event. Lastly, just like Vanessa with her projects, we are coordinating with one of the high-capacity planning projects, that is the Southwest Corridor Project, being led by Metro. We have been in touch with them throughout the process, and you know, wanting to complement that process as much as possible, and in many cases partnering on our outreach events. So what have we learned in our process? Starting with coverage, we've heard a lot about some large gaps in coverage in our existing system in Southwest, particularly in Southwest Hills, particularly on Shoals Ferry Road, as areas such as that. Denny Road, which acts more towards Beaverton, but taking Garden Home Road out that far, as well as Multnomah Boulevard, but also kind of reorienting our routes so that we have better destinations. So we have coverage in some neighborhoods, but maybe there's not a good anchor at the end of the line, and so not enough people are living there to support the service. An example would be Line 1. So we have a proposal to change that line, reorient it so it goes to Washington Square, which is a larger community anchor. And by doing so, we can provide more service throughout the day for those folks. However, it may also require some people to walk further than they do today. So we're having conversations with those neighborhood associations about those trade-offs and what we're considering with them. Another major concern we heard about was frequency, span of service, and weekend service. So we're making a number of recommendations for improved frequency and span weekend. But specifically, I want to call out proposals for future frequent service lines. Capitol Highway going to PCC, it would be one that we're calling for. Beaverton Hillsdale Highway, as well as Macadam. And then finally, just getting back to connections, better connections throughout. Markham Hill, right now today, if you want to take transit to Markham Hill in the midday, you have to ride to downtown, transfer to a bus, and go up the hill. We're making a recommendation for midday service from Southwest to Markham Hill, as well as better connections to PCC Sylvania from south of PCC, from the Tualatin area, as well as better connections to Lewis and Clark College. Finally, as Alan had noted, the Southwest plan is actually in the vision phase. We've developed a draft vision, which I'm going to hand out to you. We're actually, in just a matter of days, hopefully coming out with the refined draft vision. So while I'm handing this out to you, this will get updated in just a matter of a few days, but I want you to get this, and then hopefully we'll get you the refined draft vision as well. Thank you. We've also published these in Spanish and Vietnamese as well, both online and hard copy.
So an item I'm a little surprised not to see, a complaint I've heard many, many times over the years is reliability on the number 12 on Barber.
Right. So without a doubt, that reliability on line 12 is definitely a concern. It really falls more into the reliability and capacity bucket that Alan was talking about before. So that's why it's not part of service enhancement plans, but all the time we are keeping track of that and wanting to make sure that those buses are running on time because, of course, they're very full.
Hey, Tom, there's the Barber Transit Station, which is a real busy place.
Mm-hmm.
North of there, I think it's kind of north, is Multnomah Village.
Yes.
Is that also a hub that several routes go to?
There, yes.
There's a little couplet.
Well, line 44 and line 43 both come through Multnomah Village. I don't know if we have any. Line 64. So yeah, there are a number of bus lines that come through.
So that's still happening there.
Yeah, and we're not making change. We would still have those lines going through those areas.
That seems like a good situation.
Yeah.
People can walk to it easily.
Yes, correct. Actually, one of the proposals in the draft vision is line 43, which serves Multnomah Village. One of the proposals is to actually, rather than have that continue to go downtown, have that cross the Selwood Bridge and make that southeast to southwest connection, which we don't have today. Today, you have to go up into downtown to go to southwest. So
That's
this
right.
would,
TriMet will use Selwood Bridge again.
we want
Get off of there
to.
'cause they were afraid
We're
it was
working
gonna
on it.
fall in the river.
Yeah.
So now you're going to be able to use the bridge again. That's
Well,
going to really open up options.
Because of the seismic situation with the bridge and the strength of the bridge, we were not able to run
I know.
service. But with the new bridge, it's a new world.
It'll help.
Yeah, a new day. Okay, thank you.
So just to finish that up then, I talked a little bit about what we need to be doing every year to maintain our service, this little simple graphic up here. Every year, we need to have part of our annual service plan, that maintenance. But this is really about each year, we have to make decisions about which of these elements of the vision actually get the service. And one of the things that I think we're going to be talking about is the ability for TriMet and the city to tie ourselves together more closely in ways that ensure that we can focus on the places that make sense to support the growth and the economic opportunities that you're envisioning. At the same time, we can look to the city to consider doing improvements that help the transit work better so that we get that positive synergy between the two. And really, if we think...
Sorry, just a general question. So when an entity like Intel decides they're going to have a shuttle between the transit station and their site, is that the result of a discussion with you, or they just do it on their own?
Whenever that kind of thing happens, it can happen in any way. If they're seeing needs that it either doesn't make sense for us to try to address, or that we're not addressing, somebody may choose to do that. We absolutely coordinate with them, and Tom, who is our lead for West Side in that specific instance, worked with them, and we're looking at over time being able to have shared stops at both the MAX stations, for example, and at the Intel site, so that people can take just whatever's coming next and get as much benefit out of that as possible. If we're looking at what we're trying to do is, get people to work, help fight and give alternatives to congestion, provide service that helps guide or encourage activity and economic development in the places where the jurisdictions see it being in the right place to support the regional and city visions, and meet the sort of not just ladders of opportunity, but basic access to get to daily needs, food, healthcare, all of those kinds of things. We're trying to infuse all of what we do with these SEPs and with our annual service plan with those missions as we tend to talk about it. Our goals are very much aligned with the City of Portland's, we think, and the more we talk to BPS folks and PBOT folks, and the more the three of us talk together, there's very much an opportunity for us to almost maybe handcuff ourselves together so that our future improvements and their future
Here come your
improvements-
handcuffs.
Whenever I say handcuffs,
Watch these guys,
Handcuffs?
to tie,
Yeah.
to tie ourselves together, because our goals are very much aligned. It makes sense for us to, we should be providing more service where the city expects growth to happen. We should be providing service where there's a very clear need in looking at it for ladders of opportunity for people to get access to jobs and education and healthcare. It also makes sense that if we're a part of your vision for how the city is going to grow, that the city could do what it can do to make that transit service as effective and efficient as possible. The more we work together, the better chance we have to meet our shared goals, and our goals are very much aligned. And so I think with that, oops, I have no idea where we are. Oh, there we go. We have been talking at staff level about the need for this three-way partnership, the three being TriMet, PBOT, BPS, so tying our two great agencies, jurisdictions together to try and meet some of these goals in the future. So I'm not sure which of you I'm handing it off to.
I think I'll start
Okay,
off.
great.
So as we've started to discuss the TSP, the rationale in part for bringing TriMet here today and also starting to talk about this connection between the three agencies is that we're obviously building a land use proposal that is very much dependent on a good transit system and an improving transit system over time. Our land use plans don't work without it. And with the capital improvement part of the discussion, you can see those connections. We're either building something where it's connected to the land use vision or we're not. But traditionally in the TSP, because it's a capital plan, it doesn't always cover what is the connection to the operations and the service provision that TriMet leads. And so going back to an earlier comment I think that Andre made is how do we make sure that we've tied ourselves to that commitment to provide that service and address those things, not just on the capital planning side, but on the service planning side. So that was the point of that, of discussing this, and I think maybe you can talk a little bit more about the details, and we can pass out this.
So we just passed on. I think the next slide, though, is still you, right? Sorry. Sorry.
That handcuff thing.
So this map is just a map of the transit service system, the frequent transit service system, which includes the streetcar, light rail, and frequent buses that we modeled with the 2035 land use. So when we report back to you the performance of the combined system, these are assumptions, and they're consistent, we believe, with the service enhancement planning at a general level, and consistent with the current direction TriMet's going. I highlighted a couple different lines there to just point out the darker blue lines on Powell Division and Southwest Corridor to indicate that those are major points where the land use and the capital investment pieces connect. Obviously, the small red line in the middle, or actually it's orange on my screen, but it appears red on yours, is the streetcar question in McAdam. And then the red lines on the upper right are concepts that have been discussed at the staff level with TriMet about how do we deliver that frequent bus network to the portion of East Portland that needs that system, that doesn't have it today. And again, these are conceptual lines that don't get too hung up on the exact place it turns or the exact, but conceptually, I think Alan already mentioned it, and the SEP mentioned the idea of 162nd, 148th, and 122nd, and connecting that better to the Columbia Corridor. So these concepts were modeled as we looked at the land use, and we will continue to work with TriMet on how to make that happen as they proceed with their plans. Then I think it's my cue to turn it over to you.
Right. So what we've produced in somewhat rapid form, but this was something that we had talked about really for some months. So it was helpful to have the instigation of this conversation to force us to get a draft of what does the work plan look like for us to try to answer this question of how do we have coordinated growth strategy, infrastructure investment, along with transit service. And so really what it ends up becoming is there's sort of multiple pieces to it, but we have the growth strategy, which is really what you're already putting before us through the comprehensive plan, that needs to be complemented by very clear intentional investments in access to transit types of facilities, sidewalk connections, better bus stops, better lighting, better crossings, that then can be complemented by the right level of transit service to get somebody to those jobs, to those places of commerce and activity. And so what we have before you as a letter of intent is really the first attempt at trying to put together these pieces. What we do have coming up is a couple near-term activities. One is a TGM grant, Transportation Growth Management Grant, that's called Growing Transit Communities, which is looking at some key corridors and how we can develop this interrelationship. So we produced a grant application last year, and we'll be starting work this summer on that. So that's one piece that we're already underway with that I think will help us refine this methodology of how we can deliver these sort of package goods together. And the other is that we're looking at something we're calling Enhanced Transit Corridors Plan as a next step that is looking more at some additional corridors as well. I don't know if there's a next slide that, so some of those we've already touched those. So I think what the feedback we're looking for, this is the sort of beginning of this conversation. We're looking for some feedback from you about whether we're on the right track, if this is sort of matching what your expectations are as a commission. If there are certain things that you want to make sure that we're including in the plan or in the planned activities, we'd welcome that kind of feedback.
Chris?
One closing comment before you get in there. One of the ways this relates to periodic review and this comprehensive plan process is that through periodic review, there's a process of establishing more formal service agreements with providers of service and TriMet is a provider. The sort of default agreement that you might see between a transit provider and a city is pretty uninspiring. It just says they provide service and we agree they provide service, and and we'll continue to be the city. That's about as deep as it goes. We aspire to something a little more specific and a little more where we mutually are making some commitments to each other about the sidewalks we intend to build and the land use we will deliver, and we'll never get a 100-year guarantee for a certain bus line continuing exactly the way it was, but the idea is a mutual commitment of service and infrastructure investments.
Okay. In the interest of time, keep your comments short, so we're going up on 5.
So we have a previous example of this, right? We have the streetcar master agreement,
Yeah.
which is a three-party agreement between the PBOT, Portland Streetcar Inc., and TriMet. Now that took 10 years to get to, working through various forms of partnership. How do you see this? This is obviously a starting point. How do you see this evolving towards something potentially that substantial, reflecting the city's capital investment in the streetscapes and TriMet's commitment to service?
Right. Well, we do have a many-year tradition of collaboration as agencies. Really, this master agreement that you're referencing was really Alan and I locking ourselves in some conference rooms over the course of about a year to get to that product. So there certainly is a lot of precedent with the players that are in front of you with getting to collaborative agreements. I think that what we're likely to see here is smaller scale conversations around specific corridors, around co-investment in those corridors. And that's really what we haven't quite figured out yet, but that's what we think is likely the products that we would start to see is a broader declaration of intent, perhaps through the service agreement that, per periodic review, that then leads us into very specific investment strategies.
And the map I showed up there earlier was an indication of some potential priorities focused on some of the East Portland service enhancements.
Right.
And I think, our objective is permanence and stability through economic downturns. So, whatever we can get to in that direction.
Everybody's is, of course. But absolutely, I mean, I think you and I talked about this a little bit. To the extent that the city has made investments in corridors where we're providing, what becomes frequent service, it's easier for us to prioritize those in times of stress because of that investment. Right. And that's why I talk about us tying ourselves to each other. And in good times, it's easier for us to say, hey, it really makes sense to invest there.
Don, you had a question?
Well, just a comment, this letter of intent looks like more of an overarching agreement between the agencies. So, Director Anderson's here, so maybe Leah and Neil could just pop over and we'll sign it right here.
Right? We don't have Neil. Right.
Oh, wait, it's stamped wrapped. Okay,
Right.
maybe we'll
But I think this
anyway, I think it's kind of good that it states intent in an overarching manner and states the cooperative work effort. Not so much the details.
Yeah.
At this point.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
Gary?
A couple of quick questions. Alan from TriMet. Thank you for presenting the map that showed the budget variance over time. As a percentage of the TriMet budget, how much is that? How much is that percentage-wise? It was a handful of millions popping up and down.
Well, the farther out you went, the more it was. In the far out years, it was getting to be a quarter or more of our budget. Now we're back to, it's essentially zero because we're steady state. So
The
does
long-term average
it
is
make sense?
zero.
The farther out you went, the graphs were going the wrong direction.
Yeah, the fallout.
And it was basically, if we had stayed on that, within 2 years, we were going to have to start cutting service. And the farther we went, the more service we would have to cut.
And so you're in a place now where those dips that are happening, you'll be able to manage those over
Yeah,
time?
absolutely. I mean, we have to keep a 2.5-month reserve, in cash in the system so that if we're down a little bit 1 year, as long as we bounce back up within a couple of years, it's all good.
Okay. My other question was, I'm a Northwest Portland resident, and when they closed the Thurman Street Bridge, we got this marvelous new service from TriMet, a van that spun around the neighborhood, and it got me thinking about, it reminded me a bit of the colectivos in Mexico, but also got me thinking about, are there other ways that we can do transit, particularly for neighborhoods that are on the edge of town centers or neighborhood centers? And so I just wanted to pose the question whether TriMet's been looking at any more radical or creative solutions to some of the transit.
What you'll see if you have any time to take a look at the service enhancement plans is there's a tool that we're calling community connectors. And that is, right now, we've just defined that as, here's an area that needs service, needs some kind of connection, but it's an area that either because of the built environment or what's going on there or the geography or whatever, a traditional fixed route bus service is going to be a really poor performer. And so it just doesn't make sense to have that kind of service. But we can look at trying to right size the vehicle and the service and work with a partner to provide a different kind of connection into the rest of the network. The example that's easiest to point at is the Grove Link, that is a partnership with the Forest Grove and a nonprofit transportation provider called Ride Connection that's essentially being funded with flexible federal funds right now. Those eventually dry up, so we have the challenge now to go out and work with them to identify future funds. But that's the kind of thing that we'll be angling towards, looking at that or versions of that as the ability to extend our coverage in places where it doesn't make sense to run a frequent service bus, for example.
Thank you.
Howard?
Oh, I just want to be brief. I'm very pleased to see in all the years I've sat here a letter of intent between TriMet, PBOT, and the City of Portland Planning and Sustainability Commission, and I hope we can sign it soon. This is something I've been waiting to see a long time. Thank you.
I am really pleased to see this thing. It wasn't that hard. But I want to kind of emphasize what Chris talked about. My issue is commitment of TriMet, and I love the idea that we're going to match what we're doing with planning with the investments out of PBOT, and then we get the transit. I mean, that all just seems to make common sense. And, you know, the obviously details of when those improvements occur out of PBOT gets to your transit service and a lot of that. But at the end of the day, it's about how long is that commitment. So if it's, you put it in and it's transit service, we get the building built and the corridor fills up with people and the transit service disappears, that doesn't seem to be the same commitment that the other transit lines, the BRT or Southwest Corridor, is going to get from your commitment to the federal government for that money. And so I'm looking for, in this agreement, to say, if we make, the City of Portland makes these investments, what's TriMet's commitment to longevity in these corridors that we're doing the service enhancements? And especially when we talk about East Portland with that kind of equity issue, that they're not the first to get it and the first to lose it. So that maybe other corridors take hits before they do because of equity. And so I don't know how you're going to deal with that, but that really is a crux of the issue to me, because I think we've made a huge step in aligning a comp plan development over the next few years, 20 years, and public investment in that transit service and in trying to right equity. And I think that's significant. I mean, it really is good work, Art. I mean, it really is good work. And Eric and you guys have just done an amazing job. But now we've got to figure out how to preserve it through thick and thin. And that's really a big challenge. And I know it's not just making a commitment, but and so it's going to take, again, I will go to Karen, bold thinking, and try to get there. The other thing I would look for here is to solve the student transit problem. Jobs and education, we're in all the service areas. And in East Portland, 3 school districts don't enjoy free transit relative to Portland Public Schools. So as we improve the transit service out there, how do we get all of those 3 school districts, Park Rose, David Douglas, and Reynolds? And Reynolds has very little in the Portland area, but how do we get those kids on free transit service? Because now we're putting in the service that they can go to school with 122nd, 142nd, 162nd. You're doing out to Gresham. We can put those kids on buses and help our climate action plan that we've got out, and also help those school districts.
So to feedback from TriMet's perspective, one, definitely understand the thinking behind that commitment to specific corridors, and I think that's why we're anticipating that, the more we drill down to details, the more specific it's going to be, so that we can actually get to the point where there's opportunity to make commitments that are real. What exactly that looks like, none of us really know quite yet, but I think the intent at least is clear to me. It's probably worth pointing out that the commitment to the federal government that you're referring to is specifically for the Orange Line, because of something that happened in Utah, where they cut service without telling the federal government. We don't have that same commitment to the federal government for any of our other projects, but we do anticipate that future ones would. So it doesn't take away from your point. I just wanted to clarify that. And when we opened, for example, when we opened the Green Line, we opened with 1/3 less service than we expected to, because we were in the middle of an economic downturn and didn't have the resources. So we'll be searching for ways to get to that greater commitment in ways that, we're still beholden to our own budgeting bodies, but let's see what we can do to make that more serious commitment. And then I was going to make a point about the second one, and I just forgot what it was, so I apologize.
Maggie?
I guess what we've been saying about access to schools is exactly pretty much what you said, which is we've got to improve the service enough to make it so that even if somebody finds the resources to get them passes, it's worth them taking it. I had to go to David Douglas the other day for a Powell Division meeting, and it is centrally isolated from all of the bus, all the streets that we can run a bus on almost. So we need to find ways to get better connections that also do other things with that same route to make them frequent enough to actually be attractive to students, and then look for partnerships to pay for that additional subsidy.
Maggie?
So you're obviously doing an analysis of, access to food, fair access to transportation, et cetera. Are you also doing, like we discussed this earlier, displacement analysis? Like, what impact would this have on existing communities that could conceivably displace them?
The focus of that effort is on the Powell Division BRT project, because that's a sort of more noticeable, higher grade physical infrastructure improvement that is the kind of thing that seems like it's a greater risk for that impact. Recognize that, we're certainly seeing development on pretty much all of our frequent service lines, but I think the way we're approaching it, largely, honestly, with the lead from the city, is understanding how we can respond to that pressure that's brought by transit service using the Powell Division BRT as the lead for understanding that.
There's a unique aspect to when you make a physical capital improvement in the ground, it has the potential to capitalize into property values, which is potentially what's driving that, which isn't quite the same as running a bus.
The other thing is that we think about jobs for this, and really I see transit as a prosperity tool for especially East Portland, being able to get to jobs and reduce their cost of housing in a methodology of hopefully helping them preserve and stay in that community in an affordable way. So I see this as a valuable tool in that kind of whole process as we talk about displacement from a comp plan standpoint. Other questions? Teresa?
So this one's for Art. So we had a number of community folks want to see the project lists and everything. Have you gotten feedback on that, or millions of people looking at your lists and happily smiling?
Well, so there's sort of a couple different ways. So that the map app has already shown one version of the list. Also on the web page, there has been another version of the list. What we're just now prepping is a whole nother deluge of paper, which is the lists and the individual scoring of all those projects, as well as all the program reference lists. So all those elements are just nearing completion and will be populated on the website in the next couple days. So we're continuing to feed them as much paper as they can devour. Yeah. Or web content, I guess, right? Yeah.
Susan, you had a comment?
Yeah.
Just two quick things. One is traditionally what we do when we're working with different government agencies between us, we start with a letter of intent, but sooner or later we do end up with an intergovernmental agreement if we want to. And that's a legal contract. And, you know, we could look at both sides of it really in that in the long run, if we can show that we are going to provide demand and you're going to be the supply side, we can have a contract about that. And if our demand goes way up, you have it, you know, there's some kind of a bandwidth that we could set up. And if demand falls way off because we don't actually deliver due to the land use or something else, there's got to be something in it for TriMet too. You know, there's kind of got to be a thing there. So yeah, I think it would be super creative to look at, you know, how would you do that? How would you, who else benefits? There's private sector, large companies, education facilities, hospitals, institutions who might benefit from having this. You know, there might be more than just the three in terms of wanting to actually pay more or less to make sure we get it. So I think that's something, you know, that's the 2, 3, 4, 5-year plan to get there, but it's not going to happen tomorrow.
It'd be ridership based.
Yeah,
Well,
basically everybody
I
promises we're going to be in or not. And
I don't know that ridership, though, because ridership is, to me, it's a demand thing. And
Sure.
right now you can say there's no demand, but they can't walk to the bus. So
there's got to be a time.
There's got to be kind of I think you got to put the bus there. You got to make the physical investment, put the bus there, and then you make a decision about ridership. Because if it's always ridership, you don't make the investment today. I mean, we're limited by our physical attributes in East Portland.
Potential ridership.
Potential, yeah.
Right. And so I think it's absolutely the kind of things that we can try to look to incorporate is sort of, you know, what are the right tools? The recent example we do have through the Streetcar Master Agreement is a similar kind of stair-stepping approach where there's a certain call and response about, you know, what is happening and what's the right service level or investment strategy to respond to it. So it could be that we figure out some similar tiers to incorporate into a relationship, and probably specifically line by line. You know, we would take a corridor and talk about how do we sort of formalize that transaction of prioritizing investment rather than sort of across a whole system.
Appropriately bold, I think it would make each of the three agencies slightly uncomfortable, not just TriMet, in the sense that
no, we want TriMet uncomfortable.
That, you know, they're going to ask us. They're going to ask us for land use policy and parking policy and transportation demand management policy that is hard and you know so all of us have that same fiscal issue that it's hard to do these things in downtimes.
Well, I think Susan's point too of getting more participants, so it's just not the three of you up there, but some private people also would be. I mean, it'd be great. I mean, that's kind of the bold thinking of who else benefits from the service.
Certainly a redevelopment proposal or, you know, a new jobs access center in there would be a welcome.
Yeah, I'd point out that one of the features of the streetcar agreement is an executive level management structure that keeps the coordination going. So that might be something to think about in this case as well.
Oh.
Wait, just one last thing, and this is more just a wrap up also, if we're done sort of with transportation, is, you know, 3 years ago, we had the Portland plan or maybe it was 3.5, whatever it was, at council, and you think about our focus on equity, our focus on jobs, environmental issues, on, you know, housing and how those were all integrated together. And we were just kind of saying big, broad statements. And I heard the housing director, I heard staff at every level today, and I think the past couple days, just saying that like it was normal. You know, like, of course we're going to talk about displacement. Of course we're going to talk about all these issues. And I just, we don't celebrate very often. And so I just really want to thank all of you for, I know these meetings are grueling, but we've come a long way in the past 3 or 4 years. So thank you very much.
We actually have one other bureau to bring to the party today as well. One of the other questions that Mike Hauk brought up was coordination with BES.
Yes.
So we actually have invited staff from BES to come and be part of this.
He just woke up.
Yeah.
So he's
You're seeing him there?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, he was leaning back against the wall.
Mark Lear, Portland Bureau of Transportation. In the theme of celebrating, it's great to be here with Don Uchiyama. We've, with Bureau of Environmental Services, as was talked about at the last meeting, how we fund transportation improvements is really linked with how we also provide a lot of the environmental benefits in the right-of-way. And there's just been a lot of really positive things happening there. And it's been great to see the leadership coming out of BES and Don specifically, and she's going to give you a quick overview of some of the work that's been happening there.
Thank you, Mark. Don Uchiyama, Bureau of Environmental Services. I lead the Stormwater System Division at BES, and I'm pleased to be here today to introduce to you a charter that PBOT and BES signed in September of 2014, so just last fall, that basically outlines the commitment for the two bureaus to work together to find solutions in the right-of-way. In 2004, the city basically made a decision to take stormwater from the street and put it in vegetated facilities. We call them green streets. So basically, BES and PBOT have had to coordinate for a decade around design standards. Last year, we realized that we'd really outgrown that model of just talking about design standards and that there were much bigger issues that we needed to wrestle with and needed to coordinate on, that what was happening at the curb and at the inlet was really just too small of a venue. So in 2014, in the fall, we agreed that we would inventory all of the coordination issues that existed between the bureaus. I have a 11x7 spreadsheet that has over 40 issues of things that need to be identified. We worked with staff to pare it down to 8 priorities and then work with our leadership team to put this charter together. So basically, we've prioritized 8 top projects that we're working on now, and we have a structure with a leadership team, a coordination team, and then task teams for each of those 8 priorities. So really just quickly to say that we are coordinating, we have been, but we're doing it in a more structured and prioritized way. And when you're interested in getting to more of those details, maybe earlier in the afternoon, some afternoon, I'd be happy to come back and talk about that. So, yeah.
Sounds good. Mike, do you have any questions?
That was short and sweet. I do have a question about Parks and Recreation, since they have their forestry program. I assume they've got to be partners as well. How does the forestry program fit into the program you're describing, John?
I didn't hear the question. Was it urban forestry or parks?
How does, well, Parks has the urban forestry, and they want to know how the urban forestry program fits in with what you're doing. Is that correct, Mike?
It looks like there's a park board member that signed here on this.
One way of addressing that issue is at the next hearing, we're actually going to have Parks here for part of the panel conversation to talk a little bit more about some of that coordination. So maybe we'll handle it at the next hearing.
Okay. And I would just say that BES has the intention to put a similar charter together with the Park Bureau, but we haven't done that yet. So this is a model for future coordination with other bureaus.
So this has already been signed?
This has already been signed,
so
yes.
I need to worry about having that.
Yes, it has already been signed.
So did you hear that, Mike?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. Barely.
Okay. Yeah, I'm really pleased that Don's here giving this presentation, because one of the fears I have had, many of us have had, who've worked for years with staff to ensure more coordination among the bureaus, is the fact that there not be retrenchment. I know that the recent lawsuit regarding BES, the Water Bureau, for example, I think is kind of throwing a chill on the whole concept of green infrastructure. So I'm pleased to hear Don's support, and I'm hopeful that there won't be a retrenchment, so that each bureau is doing their own thing. And it sounds like you're still headed in that direction, which is great. You've done a lot of great work together.
Yeah, I would even add that I think that the history of the past 2 or 3 years has just strengthened our commitment to be more strategic and to look more system-wide, and instead of kind of get lost in the weeds of some of those individual details, stand back and be more strategic.
Great.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any last comments? Eric, you're going to wrap us up?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to echo what I think we heard with Deborah's help. We covered 2 fairly thick topics today. On the housing side, we are going to bring back to you, whether it's March 24th or April 14th, we have yet to work out the schedule details, but we'll bring back to you some follow-up from that displacement conversation and addressing some of the coalition's specific recommendations and getting our more detailed reaction to that. We heard general comfort and direction on the compatibility discussion that we briefly had, as well as a general endorsement of the concept of housing targets, but obviously some more details to come in terms of what those are and how we form them. The housing topics we didn't address today that we would return to, we have a little bit more of an update on how the comp plan treats homelessness and how it relates to that strategy. Want to talk through the opportunity areas mapping and that policy choice. A little bit more of a status report on the demolition issue, as well as the Single Family Development Standards Project, an update on the funding we're seeking for that. So that's kind of where we're going next on the housing questions that you addressed today. In terms of you want to briefly summarize what you think, where you are with the residential?
Yeah, it sounded like we got a general nod for the approach we've taken with the David Douglas School District, the conservation districts, and the area near the light rail station, with extra caution about making sure we're not precluding additional infrastructure investment where that has been planned or is needed. We would come back to you with the 3 remaining residential density topics, the biggest of which, I think that'll entail the most discussion, is what we call the prevalent lot patterns. That includes Eastmoreland, some testimony from South Burlingame, and then a few other areas that have similar characteristics. But we would also bring to you the proposed down designations in the natural hazard and drainage constraint areas. And then a third one would be a portion of Lombard and North Portland, where housing is currently proposed along a truck route. So those are 3 additional areas with down designations. Now, we also have some up designations we haven't yet brought to you, and so those will be on one of your upcoming sessions. And again, we'll have to figure out the timing to figure out where there's room for those discussions.
In the transportation discussion, working backwards, I think we heard a general endorsement of the approach of working towards an agreement with TriMet. We are anticipating that we did not talk about detailed project-specific comments today. We were at a bit higher level of responding to your questions earlier, so there will be more time in a future session, whether it's the 24th or the 14th, to get a little bit more into the project-specific questions to respond to Chris. I know Chris has a list, and so to the extent that you can send PBOT and BPS your current list of questions that are project-specific, we'll be getting back to that. And then we have not specifically talked yet about the Chapter 9 transportation policies and whether you had any questions about our proposed amendments to that. So there'll be an opportunity to raise that question again at a next session. So that's kind of where we're headed with these topics going forward. And I know PBOT also took a couple of your questions today to follow up on that they'll be bringing back to you. Again, we're still putting together the agenda for the next session, and we will we'll be working with in the executive meeting to check in about what that schedule looks like. But there were a number of carryovers from earlier discussions, including the centers and corridors. There were a number of things that you held over, which we'll get back to. There were a few questions you had in the community involvement piece that we're bringing back some supplemental material.
Non-conforming uses.
Non-conforming uses you have to face at some point again. So that's an overview of sort of what's remaining on the agenda. And then I do have probably another half a dozen smaller items that are of interest to specific commissioners. For example, I'll just keep picking on Chris, the open data and broadband question that we still haven't returned to that. So there's a couple items like that we don't think will take too long, but we did commit to bringing them back to you.
Great. And written testimony is open continues to be open through this Friday, correct?
This Friday, that's a good, thank you for that reminder. This is the last week of written testimony. It's not the last opportunity for testimony because once you make your recommendation, the city council will have a whole nother round of public hearings. So the public conversation is not over, but your testimony will stop as of Friday.
We have.
You also have 2 more hearings in April, April and May now, one on the EOA on April 28th, the Employment Opportunities Report. So, big picture issues around where are we headed with the economy is fair game for that hearing. And then the Scenarios Report hearing is May 12th, and big picture issues about how we're doing with the results of this plan, that's kind of the topic of that hearing. So things like where are we with our overall mode split relative to Portland Plan targets. Really, the whole topic is where are we relative to Portland Plan targets that we set.
Does the MAP app go down Friday?
Yeah, after Friday, the MAP app will cease accepting comments, but the MAP app will still be there.
Okay.
You'll still be able to see the.
Yeah, I'll miss it.
Are you going to deal with Airbnb? Looking forward to this plan, that concept coming up, is it going to be touched on? In what way? Well, Airbnb is a reality of the city. Are we going to take it on as part of the city's offering in housing, or I don't know. I just wondered. Something rather recent we're dealing with that's going to be there, I think, for the long haul. Are we planning for it or just kind of letting it drift?
It's, yeah. No,
I think, didn't council take some action?
We can't talk about it, but, I guess my perspective on it, Howard, is it a population growth thing that kind of ties it to the Portland plan? I don't think it is. But let's talk further about that. Does it have it is reality, but does it have an impact on our infrastructure as a city, right? That's what we should talk about.
Yeah, Susan?
So our next meeting is next week, and I wanted to to talk about T6, Terminal 6 and Pembina, and I wanted to make sure that we have a quorum. So I'm just checking here to see who will be there. Okay? Okay.
Next week, are you
next
coming?
week at 3 p.m. on
Howard?
the 17th. Wear green.
No, 17th.
We're having I know.
It's 17th, yes.
What time of the day is this hearing?
It's at 3. You can be
3.
out in time.
All right, good. All right, that works.
Green beer will still be flowing.
So it's from 3 to 5, and the purpose is for Pembina to be able to provide safety information and other information at that time. And I just wanted to make sure that we had a quorum. That was all.
Isn't there a net board meeting next week?
No, yep.
Yeah.
So Howard, will you be there?
Absolutely.
Catherine won't. Gary? Yes. Teresa? Don? Don? You're not?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. 6?
When are we ending that
Huh?
meeting? When are we ending that meeting? We're starting at 3?
It's supposedly
Okay.
2 hours. It's a briefing. Keep in mind, yeah, it's a briefing. It's not a hearing. So we're having, theoretically. Thank you. I think we're done. And I just want to thank Susan for this TriMet and her leadership. Eric, I know, yeah, the handcuff people, it's great.